It is so good to be together in worship this morning, and for me to look out and see among the faces that are becoming familiar and dear to me, many faces that have been familiar and dear to me for so long. All my people together, welcome. As you've already heard, today is a special day. 84 years ago on this day, the very first worship of the Riverside Church in this space was celebrated. Later this afternoon, we will gather again right here to celebrate our covenant as we mark the beginning of our life together as congregation and pastor. And today is World Communion Sunday. It's a special Sunday celebrated every first Sunday of October, where churches all over the world set aside the many things that divide us and celebrate the way the gospel brings us together. It seems so interesting to me then that on this day that we are celebrating the gift and promise of Christian community in so many different expressions here, our lectionary text for the week tell the stories of two communities that just can't seem to get the hang of life together. These are communities in which greed and distrust, pain and fear narrate their shared stories. In both instances, their manner of living in relationship with each other has caused considerable pain and even death. Today, Matthew's gospel recounts the parable Jesus told of the wicked tenants, where the owner of a vineyard trusted his tenants to care for his vineyard, and when the harvest came, he couldn't collect his profits. In fact, his representatives were beaten, stoned, killed, until he finally sent his son, whom the tenants killed too. It's a terrible story, and Jesus told it in the context of first century Palestine to address the situation in which he was living. Oppressed by Roman occupation, infighting and power struggles had permeated the beleaguered Jewish community. Corruption was running rampant in the temple. Folks were so concerned about the rules and about power and position that they forgot the great call of God to do justice, love kindness, walk humbly. You know that when Jesus began telling his parable of the wicked tenants, you could just hear a pin drop in that awkward silence. And our second text this morning is the Exodus text some of us know as the Ten Commandments. This text follows two instructive stories immediately preceding. After having been delivered out of slavery in Egypt, the people of Israel began to feel discontent. They didn't like the situation they were in. They didn't like each other, and they definitely didn't like Moses. They were hungry, they complained. There wasn't enough water. The kids were asking, "Are we there yet?" with way too much frequency. The texts say that the people beginning their sentences with phrases like, "if only," or, "well, the way we used to do it in Egypt," or, "I don't have enough," whatever. Two communities, broken and pain-filled, thousands of years apart in completely different historical situations, both characterized by violence, greed, fear, aggression, power, control. I don't know about you, but I have to say, those passages are a bit of a downer for this particular Sunday. But as I read the passages again and again this week, I began to note something that these two communities had in common. You will notice that they both share the radical witness of a God who won't give up on them, a God who keeps inviting them into the freedom and possibility of all they can be together. I started to think that perhaps these sad and terrifying stories are not texts of shame, discouragement, foreboding as we've come to understand them. I wonder if these stories are here as invitations to God's way of life-giving community. Just look. God is a God who insists on tenacious, reciprocal relationship with humanity, who works in this world through partnership with you and me. And we are not always the best partners. We have a tendency to build and cultivate relationships through destructive and self-serving means. And yet God is relentless in his determination to show us a new way, God's way. It's a way to freedom from the fractured and pain-filled patterns that bind our hands and break our hearts. Toward the possibilities of all we can find if we summon the courage together to live into God's invitation to reciprocal and life-giving relationship. But how? How do we throw off old patterns of self-promotion and limited vision and live into an invitation as bold as this? There are some among us who have recently begun a new year of school. This week I had occasion to speak with my sister about classroom rules. I asked her, "Do you remember any classroom rules from elementary school?" Without skipping a beat, she rattled off. "My days in 3rd grade will be much more pleasant if I cooperate with Mrs. Tietmeyer." I looked at her pretty impressed. "I don't know if you remember," she said, "but I had a little problem with talking constantly in 3rd grade." I hadn't remembered that, but since my sister is here today, I can say that I wasn't that surprised. Yes, she said, "One time I had to cover an entire notebook page front and back with this rule over and over again, a sheet that my teacher sent home to Mom and Dad in the report card. My days in 3rd grade will be much more pleasant if I cooperate with Mrs. Tietmeyer. My days in 3rd grade will be much more pleasant if I cooperate with Mrs. Tietmeyer." How do we live into this elusive, longed-for community that God models for us? After the Israelites made a bit of a mess out of their life together, God, in somewhat dramatic means, offered a list of rules. We've come to think of the 10 Commandments as prescriptive, almost a threatening list of moral imperatives. But God didn't share these rules to scare them or to scare us into compliance. And God didn't give us these rules as tools to hurt and fracture our communities by judging each other. Instead, think of them like classroom rules. Listen when others are talking. Follow directions. Keep your hands, feet, and objects to yourself. You know, things like that. One commentator says, we may have mistaken the tone of this passage. Rather than, "you shall not," or "you will not," or else, the tone of the language is more like this. Come on, my friends. This is how we live together. We respect God. We honor one another. In our community, we never bear false witness against each other, and we don't kill each other in spirit or in body. Oh no, we wouldn't want to do that, because that wouldn't be worthy of the freedom to which we've been invited. Instead, here's what we do. We share generously. We build the kind of human community that mirrors God's gracious love for us. These rules are not a prescriptive list of imperatives. They are an invitation. An invitation to build the kind of community that reflects God's love as we walk together into God's freedom. As we prepare today to celebrate all that God has done and will do in this place, as we come together to share this meal at the table of Christ, a table where all are welcomed to a feast of possibility and promise, hear these words again. Human community in our life together and in our individual lives often fails to reflect God's hopes and dreams for us. But God will not let our own failure and pain keep us from everything that we can be. Instead, the invitation will be issued again and again and again. An invitation to relationship, an invitation to freedom. Today, I hope you'll join me as we listen and hear God's invitation to a path of possibility and promise spread out there ahead of us. And may we look at each other, grab each other's hands, and respond together with courage. Amen.